それはないですか。なんか、でも、ちょっとフェミニズムから距離を置く人が増えるんですよね。ことはいいです。相手だったり、すでに変えてた人、すでに変えた人も結婚しちゃってて。
あ、あれ。He's not joining now. I think he's.
His internet sometimes get
Okay.
it's 1 2.
Yeah. It just disconnected. No.
He's joined.
Hi, Paul. Can you hear me? Yeah, we're muted. No. Maybe his audio is like.
Yeah. Should we text the CA for those problems?
Yeah. Wait. Hi.
Hello. He's mute himself. You are muting yourself. Can you?
Hi,
Okay.
hi. I can hear now.
Okay.
Is our audio clear too?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Just have some issues.
No worries. I think we're starting now, so you can, yeah.
One of the events of the year's JPDU. Congrats to all teams for making it this far. My name is Palutena. I'm your chair for today. My pronouns are he or they. I have two panelists with me if they wish to introduce themselves. Starting with Kak.
Hello everyone, my name is Hook. My gender pronouns he, good luck with the song.
Hi, birthday, either pronounce or best.
All right. Without further ado, let's start with the debate. Prime Minister Yagizlar.
Three points of framing before I move on to the argument. Firstly, just because we support this norm does not mean we cannot advocate for the change in the marriage system where one partner has to automatically change the name. We can still advocate that this marriage system where one has to change the name is something that is fundamentally wrong and that we should rectify it. Why is there no trade-off? I want to start with an intuition that feminists oftentimes advocate for things like justice for women, but at the same time also seek reforming the justice movement in the justice system, so these things can coexist in terms of framing. We would suggest that this is very likely because you can frame this as things like, for the time being, it might be very difficult to supersede the Supreme Court precedent that says that one has to change the name in this marriage system is good, but for the time being now, we should celebrate these courageous men for what they're doing. There are two reasons why this is likely. One is because historically, feminist women have been opposing to this system where one partner has to change the name, so this trajectory is probably going to continue. But secondly, we know that feminist women are obviously not stupid, they're going to be strategic in their own advocacy, they can have multiple different nuances. But even if there's some degree of trade-off, I would say that in terms of framing, it is incredibly very difficult at now to change a marriage structure right now for two reasons. One is that there is a legal precedent. The Supreme Court decision in 2021, 2022 decided that this system is fundamentally just, and therefore it is incredibly difficult to change a legal structure right now. But secondly, we know that LDP right now, the party in position of power, is incredibly conservative, and it oftentimes this narrative that of marriage is oftentimes co-opted, that these these hysterical women are trying to overthrow the fabric of family, and oftentimes therefore LDP has no incentive to pander to the interest of Japanese feminists. So even if they advocate for things like changing the entire structure, they're not able to do it for the time being. So it would be much nicer if we have an internal change. Secondly, how does this advocacy look like? And we would suggest that this is not equating to shaming men who don't change the name. Obviously, we're going to frame this as like these people who change the name by themselves is something that is courageous people. This is likely to be the case because obviously they have an incentive to get support from the wider public. But also note that supporting idealization looks like financing movies featuring this kind of marriage. People like, Himeno Masao, and saying that these people are incredibly great, sharing stories about it. This is going to be incredibly, advocacious. But thirdly, we suggest that Japanese feminism at least have some degree of voices and influences into the narrative of Japanese society, insofar as there are increasing younger progressive generations that are happening. And in terms of historical trajectory of the movement, Kutu movement have been relatively successful in changing the workplace structure historically. We'd also suggest there are movies and comics and pop culture that seeps in a lot of the feminist ideology right now. Two arguments. One, there is a necessity to idealize these men's behavior. Why is this the case? Because under the status quo, there is an immense amount of stigma that oftentimes when men change their name once they get married, oftentimes he's incredibly ashamed. Why? One, he's oftentimes ashamed by family members because, there's seen as abandoning their own family, that you can't be in the same grave anymore once that person dies. You're seen as abandoning your own community and family. As a consequence, oftentimes these people are ashamed. But secondly, note that it is seen as a genuine sign of weakness in the status quo, that you have compromised in marriage, that you have made the wrong decision, and therefore oftentimes women are the ones that are currently forced to change their name under the status quo. How does this change under idealization? Really suggest that idealization looks like stories that feature, frame them as courageous, as modern, and that instead of seen as something compromised, we would frame this as a true form of love. It is a form of sacrifice that one has to make to be able to get to the happiness. Why is this likely going to be effective? Because we would suggest that Japanese society is very, very conservative right now, but there are portions of individuals that are relatively progressive, particularly under the rich, younger progressive individuals. People, like a lot of the people in debating community, for example, is relatively liberal, right? And these people are likely going to change their behavior because they're willing to listen to some feminist movement. So when some people do it, it trickles down to more people. Because when we see in Japanese community that people like Masao Himeno doing this, and your friends or your bosses doing this, we would be inspired by the story. We would think twice about making that, whether or not, you're going to force your partner to change their own name, because there would be trickle-down effect onto the subsequent generation as well. So it might be a long-term impact, but there would still a substantial degree of change when it comes to the system of marriage and who changes their name. What is the impact? Note that being forced to change a name is incredibly traumatizing and really bad, because oftentimes name is symbolic. It is tied to identity as well as community. That you're seen as abandoning family, you're oftentimes ashamed. And also note that culturally, oftentimes name is associated with like who is going to go to, for example, which family's tombstone, like where they're going to be engraved, for example. Like often it's tied to fundamental important cultural aspects of Japanese society. So giving up on that, being forced to do that is something bad, but when we empower many men to do it, it is a choice and exercise of agency instead of being forced to do that. Second argument, why is this advocacy likely going to be popularly supported in Japanese society? There are three reasons. The first reason is that this advocacy is relatively less radical compared to other advocacies. Particularly Japanese feminists under the status quo are seen as incredibly, doing things like try to overthrow the system of marriage in its entirety, try to overthrow any of the Supreme Court decisions, try to overthrow any of the LDP decision. It is seen as something incredibly radical under the status quo, but we can change the narrative when we're able to show that feminist women can work within the system, can reform inside the system instead of advocating for incredibly radical external structural change. Therefore, LDP or conservative society by and large has less incentive to demonize Japanese feminists as something radical, as something that not worth listening to. Before I move on to the second mechanism code.
Yeah. It's pretty intense in the conservative context. How your feminist advocacy can engage this particular.
Yeah. So the trickle-down effect is a mechanism. So a lot of the times, rich progressive individuals do have power in corporate structure. Oftentimes, they're the one that are going to rise to the position of power in the near future. So when Masao Himeno becomes in position of power, they can also convince conservative subordinates that it is worth inspiring to, because that Japanese conservative society oftentimes value things like hierarchy. So your boss does it, it is likely that you're going to listen to the story about it. Secondly, note that the marriage note that it is incredibly important to note that this advocacy of men doing this oftentimes can be co-opted with the system of marriage, i.e., you can frame this as an important sacrifice that you're making on the part of men when it comes to marriage. That means you can frame this as a sign of love. That when you change the name, you're showing your partner that you're worth sacrificing that. It is worth that, you are a loving man, that's why you should do it. That is something that a lot of the conservative people can accept compared to the alternative narratives. Finally, note that oftentimes feminists are seen as vicious, hysterical, angry women in Japan and the status quo because of the relatively conservative norm. However, when we are able to show that they're not opposing to the system of marriage in its entirety, they just try to change the internal structure of marriage, but at the same time, try to improve upon it, they're more likely going to be supported under our side of the house. For these reasons, for the sake of Himeno Masao, I'm so proud to stand on opening government.
All right, we thank the Prime Minister for that speech. Moving on to the leader of opposition.
Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. 3 things in my speech. First of all, set up. Second of all, I'm going to explain why this is going to likely to alleviate men from the feminist movement. Third of all, I'm going to explain, why this will weaken the movement for, advocating the system of, allowing both men and female to have their own surnames. So first of all, and like although the rebuttals have been included in my speech, but like just like to say one clear rebuttal, all the cases coming from the OG was based on this premise that men in general would actually buy in to this kind of to what the feminist movement says, right? And the only reasoning that they gave us was that look, feminist movement are kind of powerful in general, but like that was like the only reasonings that was coming from the OG, and like I don't think that's pretty much enough, given that the OG like does concede that the man in general in Japan is pretty much conservative. So like given that that linear assertion, I don't think that's enough to prove that men in general are going to buy in. So moving on to setup. So first about the characterization of idealization. Two things here. So first of all, I think this is going to likely to look like talking about the individual man, individual couples who have agreed to change change the surnames, right? And like this the feminist is probably gonna do interviews, gonna do interviews, or gonna do a kind of essay and on these kind of social media, right? The second thing that I hear is that this the feminist men are likely to talk this that doing this, changing this, the man changing the surname is the condition for being a good feminist man, right? And the crucial point to know here is that the in general the emphasis is going to be put on the individual, what the individual man would do, and I think that's really harmful because I'm gonna explain that in the following reason. What does competitive look like? We're gonna push for the political change to allow allow couples to have different surnames. The OG said that they can do both at the same time, but I don't think that's really likely, because first of all there's obviously resource constraints. We can't just allocate 100% of power into this idealization, and then also allocate 100% of power to allowing for calling for political change. I don't think that's simply unlikely. But second of all, even if allocating kind of the same amount of resources was able, I don't think the society in general would be able to perceive both narratives to the same extent, because there's still going to be priority, right? Like the first thing that you're gonna say is highly likely to be more accepted by the society in general, right? So if the first thing that these feminist women are gonna say that man who changes their names is really good, we should allow that, I think the majority of the men in general would rather buy into those narratives rather than actually go deeper and try to find the second focus that these feminist women are trying to advocate for. So I don't think it's actually possible to do both. Moving on to the first argument, what is going to likely to alleviate men from feminist? Notice here that we're not talking about the really conservative people, but I think this will alienate people, men who is more liberal, who stand in the middle ground, and who have the possibility of actually becoming a pro-feminist man. The reasons are the following. First of all, simply the incentive. There's a really huge incentive that for men to not change their surnames, right? Because first of all, there's going to be significant work related problems if they change their surnames. But second of all, there's really strong traditional values that is still existent in the status quo, right? Even if the man in general wasn't really persistent on keeping his surname, probably their mother, their father, or their grandparents of this family will be really persistent on keeping their names, right? And because people in general value family, right? Because people in general wants to have a good family relationship, they probably don't want to go directly against those family issues, because if they do that, this is probably gonna there's gonna probably be a huge criticism coming from the family, right? The intuition pump that I want to give here is that just in the status quo, there's simply really few amount of people, number of men who actually change their names, right? And the second reason why this is going to alienate men in general is that people are simply unlikely to be convinced to this kind of narrative, right? First of all, in Japanese context, feminist movement don't really have that much of power in the status quo. Just looking at the status quo, feminist movement aren't really succeeding in for example, lobbying towards the government in general, and it is also oftentimes seen as radical group of women, right? And like like just on looking at on like Twitter, there's like huge criticism coming on to the feminist movement, right?
What exactly is the main advocacy of feminist movement on opposition?
On the opposition side of the wall, we are going to advocate for like the political changes that is going to happen that is going to happen to allow the separate surnames. Like the focus that I want to claim here is that we are not going to blame the we are not going to blame like the individuals who are who could not who couldn't change their surnames, but rather we are going to focus on the government the lack of government system, and we're gonna try to change that one, right? And the second reason why this is unlikely to be convinced is that this kind of emphasis is going to be only seen as individual stories, right? Like this, some really progressive couple who have agreed on doing that and agreed on doing that. And I don't think men in general would feel proximate to these kind of individual stories. Like that's why the incentive of these kind of men would not likely to be changed, right? And why this is bad? Because first of all, simply when men will feel that when they don't change their names, they are not they don't really deserve enough to actually go into the feminist movement and and do some kind of work with them, because first of all, there's probably going to be a criticism inside the feminist movement towards those men, but even if there wasn't that kind of criticism, the men in general would feel that they are not worthy of that, not worthy of actually going deep into the feminist movement, right? And that's why this is going to alienate men from feminist movement. Why this is bad? Because first of all, these men could start demonizing the feminist movement. Maybe that was unlikely, but second of all, simply there's going to be less number of supporters of feminist movement, which is simply bad because the more number of supporters, that would mean more votes, more protests, right? And this argument is really, really important because the political capital is the premise of everything, every kind of changes that could happen. Then comes the second thing: why this would be a movement for separate surnames? Because first of all, as I have been explaining, it's simply difficult to allocate the same energy to narratives at the same time. But second of all, the public in general are going to less likely to blame the government, but rather focus on the individual. More than proud to oppose.
Thank you, Leader of Opposition. Moving on to Deputy Prime Minister.
Sorry, for a second. Okay. Begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. I want to do a simple thing. Two things. First, rebuttal, and second, reconstruction. For rebuttal against all. Firstly, they say the political change and the appealing to a man and the broad general public is mutually exclusive. However, we can do at the same time because of wrong reasons. Firstly, I think that in this movement, we can appeal to a general public. I mean, the people on the ground can have a related, and this appeals to the really related and daily topic, and thus more people are likely to join the movement because the topic that feminist movement is dealing with right now is very daily, and many people are more likely to join the movement. However, okay, even if we can, we sometimes see the number of people, the number of followers of feminist movements remain the same. I think that appealing to encourage men to change their surname is the first step to a political change, and in my speech, I'll be proving to you that why the political change is unlikely and unsuccessful. So a second rebuttal then is that they say they in this movement alienate poor feminist men. This is not true. The reason they gave us is that man can know that this is very difficult process, and they has a lot of trouble in the process of changing their name. However, most men that don't know how troublesome it is, and thus when they see that good actors say that he changed his surname and they praised by other people, and more likely, and these men in general are more likely to be encouraged to change their surname, right? So a third thing they talk about is the backlash, right? However, backlash is symmetrical on both sides of the house, and any movement can lead to the backlash, right? And moreover, I think that there's two extra rebuttal. Firstly, I think the political change are more likely to get backlash because these political, in order to make political change, you have to appeal to the politician, which is more conservative than the progressive younger generations. Secondly, I think that even if they opposition can successfully lead to the political change, it doesn't matter for the general public. This is because you have to know the very detailed the system of change in the legislation. However, the general public don't know much about you can't follow keep track on the very latest political topic. Thus, even if we can make any legislative change, less people can notice and less people are encouraged to change their surname. On comparative, we are more likely to encourage and directly appeal to the general public and encourage in a very moderate way to change their surname. Fourth rebuttal is that in this movement criticize man and target the target criticism against specific man, right? So, and I think that any movements is not without fault, right? Those people are, I think that the last part of their first speaker is that reduction in the number of followers of feminist movement. I don't think this is the case because those people who are very conservative are not the part of the feminist movement in the first place. Even if the feminist movement conducts such movement, those people, even if we alienate some specific group of people, and those people are not the part of feminist movement in the first place. So I don't think that we can see the reduction in the number of followers. Rather, more people, more progressive people, but who has not been familiar to the feminist movement, are likely to join because they are more likely to prioritize partner rather than traditions. Okay, moving on to reconstruction. Two parts. Firstly, two questions then. Firstly, why the feminist movement can reach the broader general public, i.e. the man in general. So there's two reasons for this. Firstly, there's a lot of movie appealing to appealing to man. For instance, if you can watch the movie and a very pro feminist movie with your partner, right? And you have a discussion on that because there is a lot of subscription systems in the Netflix or other Amazon Primes or something, and there's a lot of feministic movies and which is encouraging people to do so. Moreover, we can donate some money or encourage make it very publicize the news that some good actors or actresses compromise to their surnames. Okay, that being said, I want to talk about at the point at which when men see that news or see the movies, how they can motivate it to change their surname. I have several reasons why this is true. The key the thesis of this argument is that I want to note that we should focus on demographic that people that we are talking about, right? And most people who made the decision of getting married with someone is mostly the young generations, and this is actually true, right? So young people are likely to be progressive, and they are not have less exposure to the very political or conservative, opinions, and thus they are more likely to take progressive actions, right? So moreover, in the status quo in Japan, not many young people are living with grandparents and grandma and grandpa, and thus these people are unlikely to obey the traditions, right? So the opposition might say this is if that's true, we can make changes still on opposition side. However, the nuance here is that in the status quo, there is when the discussion of certain whose name should be prioritized is the factors that make this change is only the traditions, right? So people are more likely to people are inclined to reluctant to make change based on other criteria, and they are more likely to take easy way to based on their traditions, right? However, if the feminist movement make a change and create a narrative that man should be encouraged to change their surname, this could be a counter narrative against the traditions, and this at the point at which there is a counter narrative that a man should be encouraged to change their surname, men are more likely to choose the latter one. Why is this true? Because as I said, the man and younger generation is likely to be progressive. Moreover, they are more likely to prioritize a partner over families. Why is this true? Because they are more likely to spend more and longer time with their partner after for the rest of their life, right? But for those reasons, I don't think that the men who get exposure to the feminist narrative are likely to choose their family rather than partners. We say that for a man, the partner is the best thing that they should choose, and for those reasons, I think that younger generations are much more likely to be encouraged to change their surname. For those reasons, oppose. Propose.
All right.
Hi, I hope I'm audible. All right, I'll probably take a POI from closing. Okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. 3 things. Firstly, on the idea that men will change their name, and secondly, why we alienate men and women, and thirdly, why we get better movement for or the establishment of this change of the system on our side house, right? Firstly, let's talk about the men changing their name argument from opening government. The first bigger mitigation that I have to their case is that their case is progressive men will now change their mind and change their names. I just think you don't need this narrative to do this massively. Number one, obviously these people are least likely to be influenced by things like traditional norms that they point to, things like their families pushing them to do this. They like to have things like liberal communities that they're in. Think people like Masao-san that are in the debating community, for example, or like to opt out of these narratives on either side of the house. It's unclear why you need to convince them externally. But secondly, these people probably care about their partners that they've outlined. They care about their partners. They communicate their partners. On our side of the house, you would still advocate for why it's important that women keep their name, because what we say is that people should be able to keep different names, and therefore, obviously, these women can still communicate to their partners about how they would want to keep their name, how this is important to them, and therefore they can have things like constructive communication that allows these people to opt out of keeping their names in the first place. So these people are the least likely people that need this kind of push in the first place. It's unclear why matters that much in the debate to begin with, right? But the second mechanism that they give is that it's going to trickle down. I just want to note that this is just an absolute assertion. This makes absolutely no sense in this debate. It's extremely unlikely this trickle down is likely to happen. Number one, many of these liberal men and conservative men are segregated in things like region and things like economic backgrounds, and therefore they're significantly unlikely to be exchanging opinions with each other in the first place. Secondly, it's seen as extremely unprofessional to talk about your personal life and talk about other things like outside of work within these workplaces in the first place. It's really unlikely that you do things like this in the first place. But thirdly, even if you do, they give zero mechanism as to why you would now follow in their footsteps to try to take these actions in the first place. If it is overwhelming narrative that you want to cater to your family, it's unclear why one person, your joshi, doing this is going to change your opinion and make you want to do this to begin with. So it just doesn't make much sense in this debate. The other mechanism that they give is that now it's going to be a narrative of courage, a narrative of sacrifice, and that's going to be successful in the first place. I just don't think this is necessarily likely to be true. I have two responses. The first thing is just unlikely to be successful for all the reasons that we already give you that I'm not going to repeat again. But secondly, I think this is likely to be actively worse. I'm going to flip their case here. The narrative shift on their side is that now the feminism movement is actively supporting this kind of thing. Notice that they already concede to the fact that the feminism movement is seen as radical, hysterical, is something that is extremely, only in the interest of women with within Japan. This looks like things like suifemi, for example, that are extremely stigmatized within the Japanese context. Notice that OG already concedes to this. In this context, it is extremely bad when the feminism movement actively says this is something you should do for women. This is something that makes you courageous, because it stigmatizes the act of doing this in and of itself even worse on their side house. This means that now people that have changed their name to fit with their partners are seen as sucking up to women, or seen as, oh, you're one of those femi people, we don't want to support you. And this kind of stigma is likely to be attached to these individuals even more, and therefore they have longer deterrence from being able to change their name in the first place. That is why we flip their mechanism. If it is true that we want these people to change their name, we shouldn't attach the feminist idea to this. These progressive men would do it anyway because they care about their partners. We would rather create change in the comparative on our side house, right? But secondly, let's talk about why men are extremely alienated, and I'll gauge to the idea that they're seen as radical, which came from opening government. So their case is like, it's seen as radical because it's likely to challenge things like the government and challenge things like the political structure. Number one, a bunch of people hate the LDP because there's massive inflation, there's massive suffering on people on the ground. It's unlikely that massive people like the LDP, so challenging the LDP is not necessarily seen as radical to begin with. But secondly, a lot of people think that this like system where you have to keep your name doesn't make much sense, because even if you're a man, it's weird that you have to keep your name, or that you might be forced to change your name, and therefore many of these people are not likely to intuitively think that changing this and necessarily that makes that radical to begin with. But thirdly, we've been advocating this for a long time. It's unlikely to be seen as radical now because we've already been doing it in the first place, right? Why is the comparative on their side likely to be seen as much more radical? Number one, it is specifically targeted at individuals and individuals changing their actions. This seems as more pertinent and relevant to you, and therefore now you feel as if you're forced to change your actions. This is likely to be triggering for more people because they feel as if now they have an individual responsibility to do something, and they feel as if they're being shamed when they do not take these actions, and people feel that this is more radical than on the comparative. But secondly, you create a shift in the narrative on their side. When you create a shift and you create a change, this creates commotion. This is likely to create things like the narrative and more stigmatization of this being radical. That is why you flip their argument on radicalization as well. Yes.
Your partner literally says in LO that most people, including liberals, do not change your name under the status quo. You, on the other hand, says progressive do this anyway. You have to believe the contradictory claim that came out of LO.
Obviously, your case of extremely progressive men, which is the only mechanism that you have, obviously don't change their name. The people that we're talking about on the middle ground change their name. Obviously, there's a nuanced, perception of this debate that I have that you don't. Secondly, even if you don't buy any of this, the people that perceive the feminism movement to be radical are the least likely to be the most important people in this debate because they hate feminism anyway and they're not going to change on either side of the house. Why is it important that we save the nuance of, people that are relatively liberal or relatively on the middle ground, which is the majority of the population, not the extremely progressive people that they want to talk about on their side, right? Notice that you aren't yes, I agree that government side says that you aren't going to shame them. I agree with that. But the nuance here is that number one, you feel as if your feminism friends might think that you aren't being feminist enough if you don't change your name, because that is the narrative that you shift on their side house. But secondly, you can't glorify something without not glorifying the other thing. It's impossible to do that. There has to be a trade-off there. What happens then is that now these individuals don't feel as if they're being feminist enough, so they're less likely to do things like support feminism or actively go to feminist conventions, for example, when they don't have a name that has changed, for example. They're less likely to do things like donations because they feel alienated from the movement in general. We already explained this on our side. I just want to impact this in two ways. Number one, obviously, we want these men to be included. You alienate these women, that's obviously bad. But secondly, I just think this is a new impact here, is that you alienate women as well, because many of these women live with these men. Many of these women create families with these men. When they feel as if when the husband, for example, feels shamed into doing this, or you're far more likely to shame the woman for being a feminist or going to the feminist conventions. But secondly, you don't want to upset your husband. You don't want to break up your marriage. You don't want to, harm your family and harm your children, for example. If your husband is less likely to be supportive of feminism, women are also likely to be less supportive of feminism as well. Women being alienated is also extremely bad. Obviously, this is the most important impact in this debate on weighing, because if you do not have a strong feminism movement, you can't achieve anything. That is the prerequisite for anything that closing might want to say in this debate. Lastly, on getting different names. Obviously, there's a trade-off. One, because there's trade-off in things like resources, but more importantly, even if the feminism movement advocates for both, the perception that people have is that there is a trade-off, because if you hear one thing and hear the second thing, you're not going to listen to both of those things. You don't spend 10 minutes listening to feminism people. You listen to them for the first 3 minutes. And if the first 3 minutes is about shaming individuals for not changing their name, that's the only thing people are going to remember. But secondly, again, the narrative comes at a trade-off of whether you want to target individuals or target the system. We would far prefer that we target the system. I agree that this has a smaller likelihood of being successful than actually being able to change, but obviously we're likely to get more support for this because it's targeted at the system generally as opposed to individuals, and we think this is a far more better narrative on our side house. For these reasons, proud to oppose.
Hi, am I audible? Press the このままで大丈夫？わかんないんだけど。あ、だよ。これって、Sorry, am I audible?
This one is different. This one for the live stream.
It's this one?
Yeah. Device not.
So,
Oh yeah. I think it's working now.
oh,
How can you hear me?
It's not from this end, it's from his end.
so he will technically be able to hear us with the camera pop back.
Yeah, he said he has some audio issue. I'm not sure how.
From when?
So, no.
さっき聞こえ、マジ何も触ってなくて、さっきは聞こえてたから。
I think you're muted now. Or like you can change your. Yeah. He can. Yeah, that's a good start.
Were you able to hear the previous speech? Okay, we can read your chat, and I think you can hear us, but we can't hear you. The audio on your end is okay. Thank you.
No gender preferred pronouns. If you have any voice, please just stand up. Try not to vocalize. I'll try to take one from at the 7:15 mark, but no, it's at not 7:15, sorry, at the 5-minute mark. But if not, I'll take one from Yohei then. Or Taichi, I don't know. Okay. Okay. My speech starts in 3, 2, and 1. I think the failure in opening bench is very simple. Opening up, government comes up here and tells us that since legal changes are legislative change can't happen, therefore we're going to just promote this sort of narrative that is going to make it easier for people to accept, right? Opening opposition basically says that no, it's going to isolate people, isolate both men and females, and therefore it's not really good for the feminist movement in general. But I think the problem here is opening opposition basically focuses on how support is going to be backing without really engaging with the fact that there's going to be a lot of obstacles for conservative men in their side of the house in this kind of situation, right? Note that I think opening government also fails to correctly engage with opening opposition's main case, which is that you're going to isolate a lot of people. So that's where our extension comes in, right? A few pieces of clarification and like context setting before we move on, right? First of all, I think given that in current status quo, even though the LDP is not liked by a lot of people, even though the incumbent is there, I think it's also reasonable to say that there's no other parties that can actually beat the LDP, which is the reason why the LDP has been in power for over the years, right? So I don't really think that this kind of political change in the sense of trying to cater to one party or trying to get this kind of legislative change is going to be possible in opening opposition, right? Secondly, I think given that the context in this debate is that the LDP wants to save face, wants to seem strong for their supporters, I think it's very improbable that they're just going to bow down to opening opposition's case of there's going to be an increase, marginal increase in liberal men opting into feminism movements, and therefore there's going to be societal or political change, right? I don't really think this is going to be reasonable, right? Having said that, moving on to the extensions that we're going to have. First of all, I think given that opening opposition contests opening government's claim about how there's going to be sacrifice, the idealization is going to be based on sacrifice, etc., how it's unrealistic. I'm going to just provide more mechanism about why this is going to be strategically fair, because I think although opening government does a fair job of saying that historically conservatives are against feminism, they don't really include a lot of mechanization about why sacrifice in general is going to be the strategically correct way to do this, right? I think first of all, historically, a lot of conservative people in Japan or around the world love the word self-sacrifice, right? I think the reason from imperial times, for example, the kamikaze unit, for example, we idealize or glorify these sorts of self-sacrificing in that kind of context, right? Even for movies like Last Samurai or like what was it, Chimoku, for example, we respect people who actually have or stand by their ideals about self-sacrifice, right? Given that, and given that the soft culture of this kind of thing component is permeating in current society, I think it's reasonable to say that conservatives are going to be able to respect the kind of ideology about self-sacrifice in our side of the house, right? The reason why this is crucial in this debate is without this kind of self-sacrifice or whatever, we think that the kind of obstacles that conservatives have been doing historically up until the past situation is going to still continue. No, thank you, right? The reason why is because already the opening opposition has already said that historically we've been against these kinds of things. Opening government also agrees, and we think that the conservatives already don't really have this kind of platform in which they can actually engage in discourse or be able to realize or understand what the other side is coming from, right? I think, first of all, to have these kinds of compromises, whether it's going to be legislative or whether it's going to be from like societal levels, I think you actually have to have some sort of understanding between the two sides, right? And I think this understanding is lacking in the sense of when conservatives just badmouth or say that the feminist movement is radicalized, and then feminist movement just hit back by saying the same thing. I think the tit for tat that has been going on for historically is the reason why obstacles are going to be there for feminist movements, right? That's the reason why a lot of liberal people, even if they're liberal, even if they do agree with feminist movements in general, can't really opt in because there's societal pressure, right? Even if opening opposition's main case is that environmentally you're in a liberal family, etc., you're still going to face societal pressure when you're at your workplace, when you're with your friends. I think given that, peer pressure in and of itself and societal pressure given that is already enough to say that liberal people are not likely to, well, opt into these kinds of schemes in the first place. At least this brings this kind of case to a dead loop, right? Why is it much better in our side of the house, and why do we override opening government in this kind of situation, right? First of all, I think we've already contextualized why self-sacrifice in and of itself is understandable or even respected by a lot of conservative people. Secondly, given that, it at least leads to a place where the same people on both sides of the house can actually promote discourse, right? Of course, I think opening opposition or closing opposition is going to hit back by saying that, this sort of discourse isn't going to lead to anything, right? No, that this isn't the end goal here, right? I think the crucial thing that the opening government missed, or the key analysis here, is that I think the LDP themselves don't want to be seen as people who actively go against these sorts of feminist movements, given that international communities already support us, He4C celebrities, as opening opposition have said. Given that, I think they're looking for a way out in the case of they want to A, save face, B, also want to support, want support from their communities, etc. Therefore, if they just stand back and let feminism do whatever they want, they're going to be seen as weak. They're going to lose support, which is actually counterintuitive to LDP or parties who want to keep power, right? Given that there's an active need for feminist movements to come out and give them the olive branch, we think the olive branch is this. Before I explain further, yes, I'll take your point.
The self-sacrifice narrative that you talk about is about self-sacrifice to your nation. Self-sacrifice to women is going to be seen as weak.
I'm not really sure why that's going to be much of a difference. Basically, because OG already claims, OG already contextualizes the fact that this sort of sacrifice for your partner is in of itself very important, and secondly, about how males already have this sort of primary goal to prioritize their spouses. But even if that's not the case, we say that this sort of self-respect, in the sense that the act of self-respect, the act of self-sacrifice in and of itself is crucial and is going to be respected, given that they're laying down their values, right? For conservative people, they can recognize the fact that it's hard for these kinds of people to actually sacrifice themselves in the current context, right? Given that, I think there's going to be enough respect for these kinds of people to actually sacrifice their ideologies for the people they love. Given that, I think it's still much better on our side of the house, right? I think reasonable to say, already in the context of this debate, conservatives actively go against these kinds of feminist movements, right? This is the reason why feminist movements don't have enough power in Japan. That's the reason why the context of this feminist movements are weak in Japan is already seen as conceded by both opening benches, right? The reason why in our side of the house, feminist movements can further their goals in whatever way, they can actively do these kinds of things without obstacles, is because it's going to lead to understand, right? At least the LDP is going to be able to take a step back, or at least these conservative movements are going to be able to take a step back and save face, at least in our side of the house. This is the kind of situation we want. Of course, we know it's not perfect. Of course, we know that there's still obstacles, there's still need for women empowerment on our side of the house, but please, judges, be comparative here. Opening opposition lacks the kind of analysis that says that it's in their side of the house it's going to get better. We already proved to you the feasibility of liberal people joining is probably on either side of the house a wash. And I think opening government hasn't been able to contextualize the solution enough, and it's unrealistic at the end of the day. We're the only team that at this moment that's already clarified the context and given you a credible solution that is going to empower females, feminist movement. And that's the reason why we're very proud of those. Not of those. Both.
Am I audible? So if the chair becomes unknowable, please just tell us in the chat. I will try to identify it. And for the POIs, please vocalize it. I will try. No, please just stand up. Do not vocalize it. Sorry. Just stand up. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. 2 things from the member. Firstly, how this idealization are likely to become sugarcoating in the first place, and why this is going to lead to more alienization by the male or more backlash from the male. But secondly, about the why this taking this motion deprives the feminist capacity to pursue much more important goals compared to these surnames or whatsoever. Right? One by one. Firstly, about the sugarcoating, so irrational choice or whatsoever. Right? The premise here is that when the male change their surnames, we think that they are going to get certain symptoms of harm, right? We think that 1, they are going to be criticized by the parents who is presumably conservative and elderly, but 2, they're going to get criticism from the society, they're going to be told that they are weak, but 3, we think that it's quite troubleness, right? We think that even if the society do not actively criticize these male, we think that society are not ready for these male changing their surname in the first place, and in that situation it is quite troublesome. For example, your co-worker is going to name yourself multiple times or whatsoever, and in that situation it's quite troublesome in the first place, right? In that situation, how this idealization are likely to become sugarcoating and why people are going to make irrational choices. That we think that the sugarcoating is going to happen because of 2 reasons. A, because in the government paradigm you have to give strong incentive for the male to change these surnames in the first place, right? Because changing surnames is quite difficult, is quite troublesome, and there's general norms that the male doesn't have to change their surname in the first place, right? In that situation, you have to show these big benefit in the first place, right? But B, we think that survivorship bias is going to exist, right? We think that the people that is going to be glorified in the government side is the people who actually luckily succeed when they change their surname. The people who luckily didn't get criticism, but rather accepted by a community, that is to say Masao-san or whatsoever in the first place, right? In that situation, there's going to be survivorship bias, and therefore we think that the information is going to be biased in the first place, right? In that situation, we say that the moderate male is going to make irrational choices when they in that situation, we say that the consequences here about the sugarcoating is a certain moderate male is going to make irrationally change their surname because of this sugarcoating. This is because of 3 reasons. A, because of uninformed choices, right? Because they are going to see only the benefit in the first place, and because they cannot identify what is harms, we think that it's quite difficult for them to have the choice, right? But 2, we think that average male people cannot imagine what it's like to change their surname in the first place, and in that situation, we think that they have to rely on these sugarcoating information in the first place. But C, we think that when you are in marriage, you have to consider many things, and you are basically happy in the first place, right? In that situation, you don't have that rational consideration in the first place, and in that situation, you cannot rationally consider whether changing your surname is beneficial or not, right? In that situation, what will happen in that paradigm is that when these male irrationally change these surname, there's certain likelihood of them getting some harms because they are not always living in debater lands, or they are not always living in this liberal society in the first place, right? In that situation, we say that these people is going to feel that they are fooled by this feminist movement, right? They are going to say that feminism movement told us a lie in the first place, and in that situation, we think that they have the incentive to strongly criticize the feminist movement. The conclusion here is that not only this conservative male, but also the moderate male that has possibility of changing this surname have the incentive to criticize this female and have the incentive to alienate this female, and therefore the likelihood of the opening opposition's arguments about bigger backlash or whatsoever is much more likely in the first place, regardless of the way that even if we take the best case that is to say in the opening comment, you don't shame the people who don't change their surnames in the first place, because at the moment that you glorify you idealize these things, we think that sugarcoating and irrational choices are likely to happen. Before moving on, yes.
Obviously, getting married is one of the most important and significant choice in one's life. People would obviously think about how their parents or friends or co-workers are going to react about this major decision in life before rushing into this irrationality.
Okay, marriage is an important choice, but they don't recognize the importance of the surnames and possible harms that is going to be given by the surname because of these kinds of sugarcoating in the first place. We think that this is important in terms of vertical extension, in terms of opening comment. But moving on to my second argument, why taking this motion deprives the feminist movement capacity to prioritize the more important goal? what we have to notice here is that all other 3 teams just thought like that these kinds of like changing surnames for the like that status quo is really harmful for the female, but I simply can't understand how harmful it is in the first place. They never like mechanize the impact of the status quo in the first place, and in that situation, I do agree the status quo is unfair, but I simply can't understand what is the extent of this kind of unfairness, and what is the like importance of change, like how like these kinds of like how necessary it is to change these status quo in the first place. We rather say that we have to like push for like more like imminent harms. For example, these kinds of like working like environment, or like these kinds of like I don't know like maternity like policy or whatsoever. Why this is going to be a trade-off? For different reasons. A, we think that society is conservative, right? But B, we think that LDP is also conservative, which means that there's going to be limited political like resources or media coverage in the first place, just as opening government are conceded, right? But C, we think that taking this motion is going to cost a lot, and they have to like movies or whatsoever, and in that situation it costs a lot. We think that it takes the certain price of the feminist capacity, right? But D, as we already told you, that taking this motion is going to cause a severe backlash by these kind of male, not only the conservative, but also for the moderate individual in the first place, right? In that situation, if we take this policy, we think it's quite difficult for the feminist movement to do other things in the first place. Why other goals, such as like working conditions or maternity like welfare or whatsoever, is much more important goal that feminists should achieve, right? We think that this is because of 2 reasons. A, we think that these kinds of harms of the like working conditions or whatsoever is much more like accessible, much more applicable to the majority of the female. What we have to note here is that changing surname is not something that only happens when you get married, and in that situation, not all the women are going to get married in the first place, right? But we think that working is something that applies for majority of the like adult females in the first place, and in that situation, we think that we have to prioritize more like likely harms in the first place, right? In that situation, when we like propose this, we think that we can save more number of people, but we can also get more buy-in from the females in the first place. But we think that the harms of this is really severe, right? I simply can understand what is the harms of these kinds of like changing, not being able to like what is the harms of you like being forced to change the surname. My like analysis about the harms that male get is something that's unique to male in the first place, and in that situation, that doesn't necessarily mean the females are going to get certain harms in the first place, right? In that situation, we think that these kinds of working condition policies such as harassment or whatsoever, or maternity leave, is something that's much more serious, because that affect their incomes or whatsoever, that affect their life choice or whatsoever in the first place, that gives them much more practical harms to these kind of individuals, and therefore we think that we have to take this seriously by all of these reasons part to propose.
Yeah, my audible maybe. So if you cannot hear me, please tell me by some chat or. Hey, so if you have any POI, please stand up. I will take around 5. I'd like to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Firstly, I will do with closing opposition, and secondly, I will do with opening opposition, and lastly, differentiation between opening government. So firstly, about closing opposition. What closing opposition to us is very silly case about very male-centric view. So firstly, I will talk about firstly, as they never explain why then feminism, even if this kind of thing is irrational for male, why then feminists should support or not is so linked is never explained. But secondly, why what we are talking about is kind of trade-off because of the woman, because women have to like trade-off between money or giving up. In the occasion, what the most important proximate goal for the feminist movement is not indirect factor of like backlash or whatsoever. It's rather we want to empower women's choices. Therefore, in that occasion, we rather prioritize the woman's like more proximate actor of feminist movement. Therefore, what they are talking about of irrational or whatsoever, we all consider that. Even if we all consider that, still it's not important. But so move on to next argument. But still irrationality of what closing opposition to us is completely symmetric to women, because woman is also very harmful. Woman is very harmful in the occasion. We have to change the surname instead because we just want to get together get married, but we have to very burdensome. We have to like order like I will change my name to workplaces or whatsoever, and it's very harmful for women. And in that occasion, if male suffering and female suffering and male suffering, we have to prioritize female suffering. Therefore, in that occasion, their explanation is never important in this debate. So see where it's out. Then move on to opening opposition. What opening opposition to us is very basically two ways. Firstly, alienating to the male and also alienating to the female. And firstly, about the alienating of the male, and this could be backlash or whatsoever. However, their contextualization of Tsuhemi or what this kind of contextualization that feminist movement is kind of already alienated in the Japanese culture some extent. In the occasion, what extent this kind of thing is really so having big delta is never explained. Rather, they kill their cases by themselves, I think. And then also what they're talking about is alienating male. However, who will be alienated by this motion is maybe the people who are really very conservative person, and this is also coming from the opening government like reputation. But anyway, this is very likely. Like people who are very so severely harmed by this motion and so caring about the feminist movement thing is rather very people who are in the very anti-feminist movement, and they feel very anti idea toward feminist movement, and they just think they just search the faults of feminist movement and they attack. And this is also not because of this motion. Rather, it's the way of the anti-feminist movements just living. Therefore, in that occasion, why this is so career delta coming from this motion is never explained. Therefore, the point coming from alienation to the male is the extent is very unclear. Compared to that, why our side is far more better? Because my partner's extension is more simple, more clearly impacting now about that. Because my personal contextualization is rather how this will be in our side of the house, why female could be at least better off, and we give the explanation how this will be better for not alienating to male, but just we kind of concede to male, and that could be better for the full feminist movement goal. This is also coming from as an impact from opening opposition. So we can kind of flip this point by saying this is in our side of the house, alienation of the male is unlikely to happen. Okay.
Our mechanism applies to men who want to be a feminist but can't because the potentiality of shame coming from this unique narrative. Obviously, this is the prerequisite for CO's impact and CG's impacts of wanting to create greater change.
It is not true because it couldn't be the condition of being the feminist movement group, because if we don't have to fully agree to whole kind of principle of feminist movement. We can have some diversity for in this particular part we agree, but in this particular part I can't agree, and this kind of diversification or spectrum of the how they want to participate and to subscribe to this feminist movement could be possible. Therefore, what they are talking about is very extreme. Yeah. Then moving to the opening government. What opening government told us, it's very simple. What they are talking about is they are talking about trickle down mechanism is will be better or however they never explain why this is so serious for feminists as in and of itself. Therefore, how this could be really better because trickle down mechanism coming from them is progressive person could do something, and this could be some perpetuate to other and whatsoever. However, it is never explained why this is uniquely happen only from this motion, because people who are already progressive is already do, and people who are not so progressive is never do. And with watching some people doing, because it's not my interest. In the occasion, why this is clearly changed their stances just because your boss changed name is never explained. Therefore, in the occasion, liberal their explanation is never having so much data and never mechanized. In the occasion, my personal extension is more shining in this space. So happy to propose. Thank you.
So I welcome POI, especially from opening. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Three things from opposition whip. Firstly, kicking out closing government from the debate, but secondly, vertical comparison. So we're going to weigh our material against the opening opposition, but lastly, engage with the opening government. Firstly, closing government. The first thing that they say is that, they analyze the context in Japan takes place. They say that, the kind of norm that the Japanese government, Japanese people currently have, especially conservative people likely to have, is something compatible with the kind of norms of kind of changing surnames by the males, etc. I just want to point out that there are a lot of contradictory norms that conservative people are likely to opt into. Therefore, the kind of conservative people are unlikely to agree with this particular idealization. For example, in Japan, there's a kind of strong norm that man should inherit household. And the not changing surname by the male is a kind of proof that the man inherit household. And this is something crucially important, especially in the traditional Japanese family. We don't necessarily understand why conservative people will suddenly abandon this particular conservative, like the conservation of the family by the male, for example, and suddenly kind of agree with the idealization to begin with. I think there's a huge logical gap, and I think closing government just kind of try to pick up the convenient norm that is likely to be compatible with the idealization. But I just want to point out that conservative people oftentimes subscribe to multiple conservative norms, and some of them is something incompatible with the idea of the idealization, or such as a man should change his surname to begin with. Therefore, their extension does not make sense at all. But secondly, and we don't necessarily understand why conservative people likely to kind of apply the narrative of self-sacrifice to this particular idealized context to begin with. We don't necessarily understand why conservative people likely to listen to the kind of voice the kind of feminist movement's advocacy to begin with. There's a huge logical gap that closing government needed to fulfill to begin with. Therefore, the marginal vertical extension that closing government provides in this debate does not take the at least opening government, and we don't think that is not a substantial contribution from the closing governments. Let's engage with the opening oppositions. Note that the kind of a lot of material, for example, males feel alienated or likely to stay away from the feminist movement, is contingent upon the very, very uncharitable characterization of how this idealization likely to happen. All says that, this particular feminist movement likely to shame women or shame men who fail to change their surname, for example, or feminist movement just coerce those kind of men to change their surnames. Not that opening governments have a very, very opposing characteristic, and they reasonably explains why feminist movement do not have an active incentive to these kind of shame individuals to begin with, because they want to be inclusive in general. I don't necessarily, moreover, opening opposition does not necessarily explain why the feminist movement's advocacy are likely to perceive to shame particular individual, and why feminists have a particular incentive to this. Note that the closing opposition's extension or characterization or idealization take the best case of opening governments, and even if we can't buy the characterizations from the opening opposition, we just told you the best version, most charitable version of idealization likely to lead to the impact that all really want to claim within this debate. What the member of opposition clearly told you within this debate, we told you that the best form of idealization as opening government reasonably characterized is likely to be like this. The one that will kind of fund the media who are likely to glorify this kind of changing a surname by the male, for example, or they just talk about the benefits of this just changing a surname among the male, for example. Note that this kind of particular idealization is likely to kind of lead to a lot of backlash and alienation a lot of male. Why this is true? Firstly, we told you this is like, at the worst case, this is likely to lead to an uninformed decision by the males to begin with, because male cannot necessarily compare the pros and cons of this, especially the feminist movement will overridingly glorify the kind of concept of this kind of idealization. That's the moment of which, especially for the male who have a limited amount of time and capacity, and oftentimes they are kind of very irrational, especially at the points of marriage, they are likely to opt into this kind of uninformed decision and they will regret this particular choice in the later due to a lot of backlash from the people around them, etc. And even if you don't buy this particular worst case, at least we think male are likely to realize that what the feminist movement is saying something hypocrite. They are kind of try to idealize the concept in a manner that is in the interest of feminist movement. They never depicts the reality as they are. How the feminist movement are lying. Note that this is very, very likely. Given a male is some male, especially in a conservative society, likely to realize that there is a strong norm that the man should not change his surname. Otherwise, they're gonna be shamed. As the Prime Minister clearly points out, when a feminist movement will discard all the negative aspects of this kind of idealization, change surnames among the males and only focus on the good aspects, that's the moment on which what the feminist movement will see as something not credible and then try to lie or try to deceive people in the manner that it benefits the feminist movement. That's the moment on which entire credibility of feminist movement likely to go down. That's the moment on which men are gonna feel alienated, and that's the moment on which this particular alienation of male is likely to happen regardless of the uncharted characterization from the opening opposition. Before that, opening government.
Your extension is nothing but speculation with too many logical steps and with too many unpredictable variables. Your claim is that feminists advocate for this, men change their name, get criticized, hey feminism, this is an absurd extension.
No. What we are saying, idealization in itself is a harm, because idealization likely to a little bit distant, likely to be a little bit different from the actually how this changing the surname really have a means to the man. Therefore, just kind of glorifying the good aspect it itself is a harm that feminist movement should not engage in this particular analysis. Note that this particular extension vertically extend a lot and fulfill a lot of kind of logical gap in the opening opposition. Even if we buy the best characterization from the opening government, we just told you that alienation of male is likely to happen. But secondly, we also horizontally extend from the opening opposition as well. We don't necessarily get the positive impact. What is the huge opportunity cost that we're gonna likely to accrue from this motion? Closing opposition just told you that there is an alternative advocacy, for example, maternity leave, which is or kind of improving the labor condition among male women. For example, this is a common agenda feminist movement currently pushing for in the status quo, and this is more likely to push in our side of the house. And because everyone is likely to agree upon this, even a male is likely to have a trickle down kind of benefits from this particular advocacy. Therefore, this is more likely to succeed, and this is more likely to impact the most proximate interests of women, such as kind of having a stable life after they get married, after they give birth, for example. Therefore, we just told you why opportunity cost is so huge. Therefore, we're gonna take over the opening opposition in terms of the impact as well. Lastly, engage with the opening government. Also, member opposition deal with majority of claim already. The opening government the case is just so simple. They say that, the feminist movement, when feminists idealize this particular choice, male is likely to opt into this. Even if that is true, opening government never proved to the extent that societal norm, for example, which try to shame women, shame men for change their surname, is still likely to exist on their side of the house, because feminist women's capital is something so limited. Therefore, even if moderate people change their surname, they are still likely to face a lot of backlash. That's the moment. I don't know necessarily understand why societal norm is likely to change and what's the impact or what's the benefits that accrue on the opening governments. At this particular point of time, what can be certain is that feminist movement's political capital significantly decreases at the moment on which they deceive. For that reason, very happy to oppose.